Good morning, and thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're going to be looking today at Psalm 54. Psalm 54, along with Psalm 52 and Psalm 34, are a triptych, really a trio together of songs from the very earliest days of David's time as an outlaw. David running initially from Saul, fleeing first to the Philistines, going and getting the sword of Goliath and being fed the showbread by the priests, and then the priests being killed, and then hiding out. And like Psalm 34, the superscription tells us this is written after he's been turned in, after he's been snitched on, and his location has been given up to King Saul, who's looking to kill him. We are continuing our study of the Psalms of David, which have historical references attached to them. And right there in the text of Psalm 54, the superscription, the line above verse 1, it says, "For the choir director on stringed instruments, a maskil of David. When the Ziphites came and said to Saul, 'Is not David hiding himself among us?'" If you'd like to read the events that are the background of these three Psalms, you can go to 1 Samuel chapters 21, 22, and 23. Again, for the choir director, I doubt that David had a choir available to him when he wrote this song, although he may have written it knowing that one day he would be king and one day this would be sung by the congregation in God's praise. I'm always intrigued by the musical notations, of which there are many. I wish I knew what their music sounded like. I really, really do. This is on stringed instruments and it's a maskil. We don't know what that means. We do know that David is a master of the lyre, but I would love to know what this sounds like. David, in these younger psalms, as we have noticed, is as a young man trusting in God completely and wholly. Whenever he escapes by his wits or escapes by the might of his arm, he never ever takes credit for that. He always gives God the credit for it. That's one of the ways he is the man after God's own heart. But he's a young man yet, and he believes that his deliverance will ultimately come in the justice of the universe because he's an innocent person. And as by the time we get to Psalm 51, he knows that's not the case. He knows that he needs grace. He needs God's graciousness and his redemption. But here he's still a young man, and it's a short song. I wish I knew what it sounded like. Let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll talk a bit about it. "Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your power. Hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen against me, and violent men have sought my life. They have not set God before them. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the sustainer of my soul. He will recompense the evil to my foes, destroy them in thy faithfulness. Willingly I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. He has delivered me from all trouble, and my eye has looked with satisfaction upon my enemies," or my eye has looked, I should say, upon my enemies. The New American Standard has added the words "with satisfaction," and I don't know that those words ought to be added there. Something about David we haven't mentioned, or well, we've mentioned at a glance, that I want to point out. David's might as a warrior, and he's unequaled in all of human history as a man of battle, unparalleled in hand-to-hand combat, unparalleled in leading a small guerrilla band, unparalleled in leading an army, unparalleled in being a king and planning campaigns. He's just is the great warrior of human history. David's arm was never raised in defense of himself as an individual, to get even with someone who had wronged him, to defend his own honor. He's always fighting for God and for God's people. As a renegade, he never raises his army against Saul. He's always protecting the borders of God's people. as an individual. You know, he goes into hand-to-hand combat against Goliath because Goliath has insulted God and has come out against God's people. And we see a full expression of that sentiment in this passage. God is the one who takes care of me. These people are against me. They're falsely accusing me. These are strangers. They're not even God's people. And I depend upon God to take care of that. And when Abigail goes out to talk to David, she brings that up, and David understands the reason of it. She said, "Do not take your own revenge. Let God do this. Let God take care of this guy. You've never done this before. Don't besmirch your name and your legacy in this way." And it makes perfect sense to David, because David never puffs out his chest like a man and takes his own, revenge on someone who has disrespected him. He never does that. God will take care of those kinds of things. He protects God's people, God's nation, God's name. That's what he's about. And we have that fully expressed even as a young man here in Psalm 54. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.